So we're back with Neil Davidson from Clandestine Design and Auxiliary Design School. He's a really good friend of mine. He's super talented. So he only came into the LT2 sort of community quite recently, but we're very glad to have him here. Remember, you can tweet in questions with the hashtag LT2Live. This one in particular, if you have anything to do with product design, development, production, marketing, sales, anything like that in the industrial design or furniture or whatever space you're working in, you need to be watching this. Thanks for coming, Neil.
Thanks, mate. No problem. Thanks for having me.
Tell me about clandestine design. I don't even know what clandestine means.
So I guess clandestine is sort of often referred to as activities often associated with espionage and spy organisations. It's kind of a covert, in the shadows meaning. I adopted it for my design consultancy because a lot of what I guess product designers do, I did it for two reasons, but the primary one is a lot of what product designers do is actually quite IP restricted and quite confidential. And often when we're doing customer research or doing secret shopper exercises, it's all very much clandestine activity. And I guess the other reason is a lot about design thinking has its roots to some degree in terms of research and reconnaissance and strategy and tactics, military-like terms, and I kind of like the linkage between those two themes. And a lot of my clients in the years past have needed designers to come and help them and have real impact and have real outcomes, so almost like a tactical outcome you'd expect out of a military operation. And they wanted to have less fluff that's often associated with design and just have outcomes and action. So that's sort of where I position the new business, which is only a year and a bit old now. So,
And so what exactly do you do? If I had an idea for a product, what then?
So obviously I'm an industrial designer in terms of I guess products. So I look after hardware, products that are hardware I guess in their nature. So instead of digital products like apps and software, I look after things that are physical and tangible. And I guess industrial design is my formal training. It's come from, I guess, the concept of the Industrial Revolution. And unlike the maker crafts movement, where the design of an object is formulated as part of its creation by the maker, an industrial designer defines the design of an object or a product before it's produced. So that's the difference between the two disciplines. So we will actually define a design based on its manufacturing principles, its commercialization strategy, its market acceptability, whole heaps of I guess sciences and human factors come into play, as well as business metrics. So we work across sort of the nexus of science, art, engineering, business, sales. And I guess our clients come to us at any point in time, in terms of consultancy mode, they come to us at any point in time from a napkin sketch to a really refined, maybe mechanical prototype.
Rhino drawing.
Yeah, whatever. So it can be sketched to CAD to just a conversation I've had with friends, or a burning need, or they've just gotten frustrated with a system or a problem, and they can come to a designer and we can use a series of, I guess, design thinking tools and approaches to try and not only solve the problem but hopefully manifest it into a product that can be commercialised.
How vast is the product range that you've worked in or do work in or are happy to work in?
It's interesting. In Australia, the industrial designers in Australia tend to be jack of all trades. You tend to have, our economy is so small and our marketplace is so small that we don't really specialise across the new product development, the roles in the new product development spectrum. And industrial designers tend to get lumped with a whole lot of product of the hardware side. So from customer research all the way through to design engineering and manufacturing management. So as a result of that, that's I guess one jack of all trades concept around Australian industrial design, but the other one is that we don't have any marketplace big enough for us to specialise. So my colleagues that work in the States, they could be industrial designers that specialise in consumer electronics, specialising in computer peripherals only. So all they do all day, every day is computer peripherals. Where in Australia I've been fortunate, and I guess in some ways we've had to, work across all sectors. So if you look back through I guess my portfolio that's attached to my previous place of employment, it's a place called CMD, Product Design Innovation. We worked in everything from Collins-class submarines, communication systems for that, to next generation golfing equipment, to dental surgery equipment, to orthopedic inserts, all spectrums, natural resources, mining. It doesn't really matter.
So with for example, with the golfing, how much, or do you outsource like the engineering / physics aspect?
So when we reach the limit of our knowledge and capability, we'll engage expertise where we can, and usually that comes in Australia through either places like the CSIRO, or we've been fortunate in Queensland have two pretty impressive universities in terms of UQ and QT and Griffith, 3. So we get engaged with their physics or their material science labs, and we get help from them when they want, and they're usually pretty excited to be playing in the commercial orientated projects that we're working on. Yeah.
How far out do they go? Like, has anyone ever engaged you to do pillows?
No, not pillows.
Would you?
Yeah, there's some awesome technology around next generation foams and memory foams and stuff and materials. Yeah. So I mean that sort of gets designers, especially industrial designers, out of bed in the morning as new generation materials and looking for applications for it. But no, I haven't been asked to do.
So do you spend some of your time, like per day or per week, looking at what's new coming out? Like, are you on? I don't even know a website for what's cool, like cool.com. Cool stuff.
Yeah, so there's in terms of material science and technology, so we subscribe to all of the major players in terms of getting newsletters and things like that. But there's also Materialise, which is a huge online database that you can subscribe to, and I guess the hacker and makers movement also have started to support materials technology because they're looking for ways of implementing, whether it be the next luminescent polymer or whatever into that space. So that's where we get that information from.
And so if I came to you early on, I've got an idea for pillows. Yeah. This is my idea for pillows. Yep. How do we work together to get this done? Do you do JVs? Do you work like an hourly basis? What goes on?
So if I was to talk from the industry behalf, it pretty much industrial design consultants are happy to work fee for service. That's the default. Mm-hmm. They're also happy if they've got themselves in a position or their business model can support it. They're more than happy to work on particular projects of interest in terms of sweat equity. Yeah. So go into partnership. They put the effort and the expertise in for some sort of downstream return. Yeah. Like sleep. And I guess the other one is royalty. You can often put agreements together where there's a royalty repayment on future and ongoing production.
And guys like yourself are actually open to that kind of conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
We find it really difficult here in the sort of startup small business space to find. A lot of people want to do apps. And it's very, very difficult to find someone who can code well and develop apps that will take anything but pay for service. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So you got to obviously keep milk and bickies on the table, and especially if you're a small consultancy. But the bigger consultancies around town often have their venture sides of their business. Yeah. I've set up Clandestine with the sole purpose of trying to make sure I've got. At least I can offer time and expertise. So I'm trying to set up my business so I've actually got space in my month to dedicate towards venture projects, whether they be my own or client-based ones. Yeah. So capital, we'd always like more capital to chuck and stuff, but that's coming slowly but surely. Yeah. So
okay, you could always partner with like one of our VCs or something. Absolutely. To go dual help. Tell us a bit about Auxiliary Design School. Okay. That's at the edge, right?
Yeah, it's at the edge. So we're using there's an MIT, linked fabrication lab that the State Library of Queensland have set up in the basement of the edge. And it's a phenomenal facility. It's open to the public generally. It's about the facility. It's worth getting on and having a look at. In my year, after I left CMD, I obviously had a non-compete clause, as most consultants do. And I left as the creative director, so it was a reasonable non-compete. And I wanted to honour that, so I looked for different ways I could use my design skills. And it had been many years since I taught at QUT. I had done some teaching 4 or 5 years earlier. So I went back teaching and helped with a couple of subjects there, and reconnected with a few colleagues and friends that are practicing designers, but also sessional academics. And it gave me a framework of the challenges that the modern academic context has in trying to deliver industry-ready industrial designers, because we do cross over in Australia so many different fields of knowledge. And so much of what we do is practical focused and tactical. So it's a lot about materials and material science and knowing how to make something, which is part of the degree which I think is getting fairly across all the board and across Australia and across the world, if you listen to people like Jonathan Ives at the moment, is something that's being sacrificed in the industrial design education market as a general rule. So one of these conversations I had with these colleagues was we should probably try and do something, try and bring some real world rigour back to the training of these students. And we started off talking about a private tutor group. And then before too long, we designed it into this massive thing with legs and walked, and it was called a design school. And Auxiliary was born. So in December, we kicked off Australia's first independent product design school.
Amazing. Completely
independent from, I guess, any sort of entity, whether it be a formal university or even our, I guess, our design representatives, like the DIA. Not for any reason, we just wanted to make sure it was completely linked with industry and had no bias whatsoever with how it engaged with the industry, and it was for industry, delivered by industry. So we set up the school, and it's an interesting model. We refer to it as an educational agency model. Sure. So the students form the core team of our design consultancy, which is the Auxiliary Design School. We have my other three co-founders, sorry, there's 4 co-founders, including me. We act as not really design educators, but design managers. Yeah. We have clients that have real projects. The students work on real projects. The aim is to deliver those projects to an industry standard of quality. And the aim of those projects is that they will be commercialised by the clients. It's done in a clandestine nature. It's fully controlled from an IP perspective. And we had this incredible result just in May with the first 9 graduates from the program, where 3 of the projects were selected for further commercialisation and consideration by Sunbeam, who was our sponsor for this program. And Four Pines, the brewery out of Sydney, selected a space beer bottle design that was one of our other projects. Awesome. For commercialisation as well. So the model works. The students have a demonstrable portfolio or project that can demonstrate the entire process of developing a real product for a real client, and the clients are happy, and we're generating realistic product outcomes. So it's in terms of that I guess that almost that reverse internship. It works
in 2 forms. I think that's really the future of working. One, from my own experience, in my previous career, designing shoes. It is so important to understand the mechanics behind it and how to put it together and what feels fine where. And not that I wore women's shoes, I did it once just to try, never again, but just to know what strap needs to go where. You can't do it just by designing on a piece of paper, and when you revert that onto a 3D model, it changes all again. It doesn't look like what you drew. And I feel like the only way I've ever learned is by doing. So it sort of happened accidentally at the London College of Fashion. You basically paid this sum, and they gave you a brief, like design a 12-piece collection or whatever it is, and then they just had a whole building of machines that you had to play with to figure out what could do what. And that's how you learn. Obviously, we weren't delivering things to a professional standard, but in that regard, that's how I learnt things quickly, and not only that, learnt how to talk to people, get people on my team, and trick them into doing the sewing for me, and whatever else existed. Do you feel like what you're doing at Auxiliary Design School is the way of the future? That it's sort of like, it's almost like project-based learning.
It is, and I think it really is that interface between, design is such a big, and it's being used now across so many different disciplines, from business to social reform to government reform to whatever, but it's such a big subject that you need to teach the right way to think about design, which the unis are doing pretty well. But I think Auxiliary will sit there as that practical interface to get their practical and tactical skills, if you want to use that set of terms, ready for industry. And I think it was coming back to your point, I think it was Frog or Idea, one of those big guys, recently coined the phrase or pushing the concept of build to think as a design system, and I think that's quite valid. So that's sort of where we're up to, and you know, I can still remember interns coming to my old work where I was at CMD as the creative director and managing interns, and them super excited about tearing products down and getting into the workshop and extracting standard parts and going to remodel them and put them into a new design. And then they'd come back 5 minutes later after you gave them the brief, and they're like, okay, so what tools do we use and how do we use them in the workshop? And you realise, okay, there's a whole lot of foundational skills that we need to teach here that isn't really getting as much light as it could do.
Sure. So is what gets you out of bed the excitement of creating something completely new?
Yeah, it drives my wife insane. So it's like every spare hour, my brain doesn't really turn off, and even on weekends or at a cafe down at the beach, I've still got my sketch pad out thinking about stuff and recording ideas, and you know, I'm just as happy on a weekend going for a motorcycle ride, or I am sitting there CADing and creating and prototyping and model making. Sort of, I'm in that lucky space where my passion is my hobby as well and my job. You know, it's.
Did you design your motorcycle?
Not this one. No, but a good mate of mine did actually. Wow. Well, for a person I know quite well did. Yeah. So, but I've got a project bike at the moment, another one, which I am actually designing. I guess some modifications to it, like it's all the craze at the moment. But so it's. There's a big consultancy in Austria that I am reasonably well connected with that does all of the design work for KTM. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be over there a few years ago and saw all the early clay models and the sketching and the prototyping that went into the same motorcycle I ended up purchasing recently.
Fantastic.
So it's really good. Yeah.
And how do you prototype and validate what you're designing? Do you use 3D printers? Do you have 3D printers in your studio?
Yeah, so early on in the design phase, I guess my ethos is to get into the workshop and I'll be sketching and crudely model making, low fidelity model making or prototyping. So, you know, if it's a tool or a utensil, you can really fabricate that quite roughly and test its principles. At the same time, you're sketching to assess its aesthetics and how you can get it ready for market acceptance. And then you go through CAD and engineering, and then once you've got something that can be reproduced digitally into you know, using 3D printers, or physically I should say, using 3D printers from digital data, we do a lot of 3D printing. So I've got a couple of 3D printers at home. They're domestic class machines. There's a whole world of I guess industry class machines that are much better resolution than what I can print at home currently. And then when it gets to the point of getting sort of field trial units or prototypes that you want to put into usage before you go to production, that's when you'd probably get professional models made. And to the untrained eye, they will look every bit like a real product. And hopefully, if it's an advanced product like a phone or something, it would have real electronics in it. It would have like beta firmware, and it would work. And you'd be able to give it to customers and get some really decent feedback on that.
Fantastic.
Once you find out all the bugs and you think your design's as optimised as you can, then you go to tooling and mass production management, I guess, phase of the program. And
you guys can cover that as well?
Yeah, lots of time in Asia, running around, helping our clients set up supply chains, or going and assessing and auditing supply chains in terms of quality, but also overseeing tooling runs and production runs. It's every day. It's an everyday job for an industrial designer in Australia. Again, not so much elsewhere in the world. So it's pretty much from the start, from customer research all the way through to post-production, market release. Then you might come back 6 months later and reconnect with your clients. So how did it go? Did it meet all your expectations? What can we learn from the last 6 months of sales and user feedback? What can we do for the next program moving forward? And it's that constant iterative R&D cycle from that point on.
Okay, just so you know, we've actually got a Twitter question. And
the Factory Girl blog.
Yes. What inspired you to get into industrial design?
I guess I was actually really fortunate. My graphics teacher. Wow. I grew up in the country, as I said at the start, and I think that sort of there was a bit of nurture nature where I was constantly trying to problem solve on the farm, and we were building and repairing machinery all the time. So that sort of mechanical innovator's mind was already there. Dad had instilled a lot of that, and then during graphics, I always remember the tasks where you'd have to redraw the part.
Yeah.
I'd always redraw the part, but then try and modify it to make it better.
Yeah.
And the graphics teacher must be his frustration is like, you're just supposed to replicate the part, not
Yeah.
actually try and change its design. And then about year 10, he's like, I think you should be an industrial designer. And he luckily had a heap of material organised for me to give me that, so that when it came to selecting my senior subjects, it was sweet. I set them up to get straight into industrial design. So from year 10, I was pretty much on the path.
Yeah.
Yeah, and knew what I wanted to do. And there's a most amazing design consultancy I've ever come across is a London firm called Seymour Powell, and they were what inspired me. I saw some BBC videos, a series of documentaries called The Design of Dream Machines.
Yeah.
It was a 4 or 6 part
Yeah.
series from the BBC on this consultancy in London, and they were just the coolest cats. They just, you know, this is like in the 80s, going to Delhi and designing scooters for Indian scooter manufacturers, or designing the next, you know, kettle for Tefal or whatever. It was cool stuff. You know, as a 15-year-old, it blew my mind.
Incredible. So your diary must be ridiculous. If someone can truly come to you with an idea that they've done a little bit of research behind that they believe would work, like I have about 10 of those a day.
Yeah.
You must have a million people messaging you every day, saying, "Can I come? Can we talk about my idea?"
Oh, it gets busy. There's waves. It's interesting. I think, you know, for me, if I go back to the days of running the consultancy CMD, which was a reasonable, it was, you know, probably had been up to the 3rd largest consultancy in Australia, the phones would just be intensely ringing. Clandestine is growing slowly, and I've got a little, you know, stable of clients I'm quite happy with. Actively seeking more as we go. Yeah, and welcome any inquiries. But yeah.
Okay.
So in that regard,
you there, it's time to wrap it up.
In that regard, how do people get in touch with you?
They can find me on LinkedIn or through clandestinedesignGroup.com, and yeah. That's probably the easiest way.
Fantastic. That's awesome, man. Thanks
so
much,
Appreciate it.
Really
Thanks very much, mate.
Dude. That was rad.
Awesome, buddy.